this, but I'm Erika Lentz. I'm with USGS. I'm out of our Woods Hole Coastal and Marine Sciences office. Um, I am a research geologist by training. I was not somebody that was really well steeped in usability, design, building something. And this is really an opportunity to tell a story of a group of people that came together with a variety of different levels of expertise and information and found a way to work together and build something kind of cool, or at least we think so. Richard, I'm going to pause there and just let you introduce yourself before I go on, if that's okay.
Yep, no problem. So I'm Richard Snell. I'm actually a contractor to USGS. I work for Cherokee Nation System Solutions, but I'm contracted to the St. Pete office of USGS. I've been working with them for about 11 years now, which is kind of crazy. So I'm a computer and web application developer, and my job is basically to support scientists in any way that I can in collection and processing and dissemination of data, or anything else that they can come up with that I can produce a solution for. In this case, it was the Coastal Science Navigator, which is a web application, but we do build, computer apps and that kind of stuff as well. So, yeah, that's me. I had no real oceanographic training or anything like that when I joined USGS. I was just a developer straight out of college. So everything I've learned with these guys, and it's been an awful lot. So that's kind of cool.
I would argue that the partnership and relationship that we've built with Richard is part of the secret sauce of what we've been able to do. He's absolutely phenomenal to work with. So, sorry, Richard, you knew I was going to gush at some point. Let's get it over early. Okay. Okay, so moving on. So this just kind of shows a variety of pieces of where we were at and kind of where the story starts, which is we are a national scale program within USGS. We're part of the Coastal and Marine Hazards and Resources Program. We have offices on all three coasts, Florida, Massachusetts, and California. We needed to do a better job of telling the nation who we are, what data that we serve, and what we're about. We also knew that us deciding how we were going to tell the story wasn't necessarily the best way. We needed to hear from our potential users about how best to help us tell this story. We integrated some user-centered design elements into this, which I'll talk more about shortly, to build something. And that thing that we built is the Coastal Science Navigator. We call this an online gateway to USGS coastal change hazards resources. It's intended to help users find products and tools relevant to their needs. So it's really intended to guide people to what they might be looking for, and also to help them discover things that they didn't know were potentially available to them. So there's a guided and filter search functionality to this. Everything in the Navigator includes comprehensive summaries of the products and what the user is looking at. And again, users or stakeholders were involved in the creation process, as well as some of the testing that we did to evaluate this. So just again, because I think it sets up the problem well, and what I was saying earlier, we sit in USGS under the Natural Hazards Mission Area. This includes water and earthquakes and remote sensing and volcanoes and landslides and all this really sexy, cool stuff. And we did not have a great presence because we hadn't really brought all our information in together in ways that were discoverable and resonated and were easily clickable on a website like this. So this is where, we kind of came together programmatically and started to think about what we could deliver and how we could start to bring a lot of the data and products and information that we had together in a more meaningful way. We had some lofty initial project goals. We knew we needed to look internally and also look out and figure out who we were and were not reaching with the information that we wanted to serve. We needed to develop something and get feedback along the way to help us refine it, and continue to refine that, and also create an outreach or engagement component. So that was just kind of
Erica,
an initial scratch. Yes.
were you meant to be sharing your screen or slides? I'm not seeing anything at the moment.
Was.
I'm seeing you.
You
I
know,
can
we
see them.
tested all of this.
Oh,
Oh, you
okay. So
can?
it must
Okay.
be me then. I need
All
to
right.
find
Yeah,
it.
I can see it.
My
Okay, good.
apologies.
No worries, not at all. So you bring a group of scientists all together in a room and say, we're going to tell this story. We need to figure out what goes into this. And people can be problematic because everybody has an opinion. This is what we need to do. No, this is what we need to do. No, this is what we needed to do. And quickly it became apparent that in order for us to deliver on this thing, we had to figure out what our process was going to be in terms of figuring out what to include, how to communicate with one another, how to talk about this, and how to move this effort forward, actually. We also did some preliminary engagement through some workshops with some stakeholder engagement specialists that we had, and we learned some broad things that, there was a need for the science that we're producing, but communities are super overwhelmed, and the term we use is tooled out. So we've got too many options. There's so many tools that are out there right now. It's overwhelming. So we couldn't introduce something new without a plan for outreach and support, and delivering the information that users really want or need. Takes investing a lot in the time, and also the expertise to listen. We recognized early on in the team that we didn't necessarily have that expertise. We could collect a lot of information, but how to synthesize that and bring all of that together was something that we lacked, at least from a social science perspective. So that's where the next phase came in. So we started to think transdisciplinary more. Let's establish some collaboration with some social scientists that, as we're getting this user information and feedback from external sources, can help us to synthesize and parse it, and help us to actually structure listening sessions and formal interviews. So we're collecting the data in a way that makes sense and passes muster. And in this phase, this would help us to define what the capabilities, whatever we built, needed to contain. A lot of us got very averse to even using the term tool because we had heard tooled out so much that we didn't even want to touch it. Just what were we doing? What did this need to address on a higher level? And then, could we also study ourselves through this process? So we recognized that we had this whole external component and gathering of information and figuring out what to do with it. But also, as we imposed a process on ourselves in which to work, could we study how well that process worked as we were gathering the information and the data? And that was something that our social scientists also brought into the equation, which is still in progress, but it's been a fascinating part of the project. So the big question we asked as we kind of launched into more formal, we got our social scientists on board, and we started to design some more formal listening sessions and interviews, really based on this overarching question of who needs what coastal data in what format to make what decisions. That was kind of the big thing that we were trying to really pull apart. And the way these were designed was really neat. We brought together, well, I'm going to get to that in a minute. So I'm going to say that was the overarching question, and we decided to use a user-centered design process. And this is something, again, a social scientist in the project brought into things, and she always liked to say, design is a way to manage ambiguity and provide some structure to ill-structured problems. So you can see the human-centered design cycle on the left-hand side, where the first phase is kind of this discovery phase, where you're doing just a real deep dive into listening and learning, from your intended users about what the needs are. You're then synthesizing or bringing that information together to figure out what the problem is that you're actually trying to solve. You're ideating and trying to figure out then what some options might be for solutions to this problem. Prototyping, designing prototypes that early and often and with lots of feedback along the way to test them out and see what's resonating. And then from there, continuing to test so you can refine and improve your solution. So it's really founded on this idea that you have to understand intimately who you're designing for in order to build something that's useful. Sorry. So, we did kind of our own internal engagement polling about who did we want our coastal science data to actually reach? Who did we feel like we were reaching well? Who do we intend to reach, but maybe aren't reaching as well? What were those targets? And so we kind of collected all of that information. And these are the survey results we took from our 3 centers. So you can see they were ranked by the numbers of times they were mentioned from the data sources. So we're obviously trying to reach researchers a lot, but also state and county planners, natural resource managers, other federal agencies, et cetera. From this, and then this is when we were introduced to the rule of 3, or I think 4, we even allowed ourselves 5, but basically our social scientists, again, very wisely said, a tool that's designed for everyone reaches no one. It just falls flat. There is no one-stop shop, one size fits all. You really need to consider some audience targets and work to design for them. So we had to winnow. So we had to eliminate from our large list to figure out who we were actually intending to reach. So we picked users with targeted users with proximity. Those that had a close proximity to the USGS mission were eliminated. Incompatibility with other contestants, if they were if they needed special attention. For example, emergency managers need a very different kind of set or flavor of tool and access than others. Those we left off the list for this time because we felt like we had other tools and products that could reach them. Whether the tool could help or would be used by another contestant, and then certainly the compatibility of the remaining contestants. So if we had other user targets that had similar needs, we felt like they could be on the list. So I'm realizing I've left out a slide here, but we ended up with a list of state and local planners, consultants, other researchers, and natural resource managers. Those were kind of our preliminary audience targets for the Navigator. We then went through a really interesting process where we developed personas. So this was thinking about within these roles or these targeted arenas that we were trying to reach, what we knew about the people in these roles. So we brainstormed. This just shows some of the data from that. Oh, Kate's clapping, yay! This actually helped to inform the interviews that we had and the listening sessions, because if we could answer a lot of these, we could also figure out where the gaps were and where we really needed to probe and get better data and information as we conducted those interviews. So this was a really fun activity as well. And then we collected a lot of data. And again, I'm sorry I left those slides out. I had a social scientist who was tag teaming on another presentation, and I think the slides went to her. But what she did was conduct 10 listening sessions with these targeted user groups. She focused on a specific user type in each listening session, and she brought together users from across the country so that folks in California could compare their experience with folks in Maine and Florida, for example. So suddenly you had a room full of resource managers, all in the same role, but with slightly different experiences. So it gave her a much deeper and richer discussion and information to work from. And so she synthesized all of this information and brought it together, and kind of her four main take homes. Again, too many tools out there. Don't build something if you don't need to, figure out what you can do that's wise and smart. That a lot of our user targets had a lack of capacity to actually learn how to use something new, even if they were able to find something that they thought might be useful. And even once they found something that might be useful, if they were kind of learning how to use it, finding how to get to the data that they needed and navigate through anything new was also, it takes time, it takes learning. And often those were things that they didn't have, especially if they're a staff of one in, a county government office. And then understanding how to apply the information that they found was also a considerable challenge. So, Richard, I think this is where you take over, as long as you have sufficient battery life, and you can cue me. And if things start to go wonky, you just let me know and I'll jump back in.
Yeah, no problem. So I did forget to mention, Kate, I think you're the only one on the call now that wasn't at the beginning, but I'm having a lot of technical problems, hence I'm in the car running on very low batteries. So please excuse any issues that we have here. So yeah, I'm the developer of the Coastal Science Navigator. So that kind of means everything you've heard so far is not really in my wheelhouse. We've got social scientists, we've got a lot of interviews going on with stakeholders, researchers that would normally be discussing with these stakeholders a lot and having a relationship with these stakeholders. That's not really where I am. However, I'm pleased to say that Erika did bring me into this very early on in the project, way before a single line of code was written. In fact, probably at least 12 months or more before a single line of code was written. And that became incredibly invaluable in working on this new way for us to develop these products. I've always been someone that's kind of tried to develop in coordination with the person I'm working with. Normally that is a USGS scientist, but in the public, sometimes it's in a vacuum where we have this idea, we think we know what they want and we go and build it, and then you push it out there and you kind of realize you haven't actually hit the mark because you didn't do that iterative process, which Erika's been talking about. So being involved early on allowed me to really get into the root of this project and to kind of live and breathe it a little bit and to want to follow the ethos in the development work as well. So that was really cool. So I got to, hear the results of the discussions as they were happening and the listening sessions and be part of the analysis of it all. And that really helped me develop the Navigator in that same method. So it gave me this solid foundational knowledge of why I was building it and what I was building. And it helped me guide some of their decision making along the way as well. So as you can see here, one of the big things we heard, no more tools, don't build another tool. And I will add that the project that this came from originally had no concept or idea of what we were going to produce. We took this entirely from the listening sessions, and our original idea was radically different. We were going to build another tool. We were going to try and build the tool, one tool that rules them all, try and get all of our data in and visualize it all in one place. And then we heard from the stakeholders, no more tools. We don't want any more tools. They're too complicated. But what we also heard was a lot of, I didn't know USGS did that. We had a lot of products that people didn't know that were out there, or that even USGS produced them. A lot of people assumed NOAA had a lot of these products. But then we also heard, and we already kind of knew this, man, USGS products, they feel like they were built in the 90s and no one ever updated them. They kind of were and still are a little bit sucky. So we didn't want to go down that same route of let's produce another tool that no one wants, that doesn't help broadcast what we already have, and that looks terrible and is horrible to operate. So let's not go down that route. Let's meet the user's need and not what we think they need, which happens an awful lot when we don't go down this human-centered design route. So to do that, we didn't want to take anything for granted. We didn't want to be making decisions for stakeholders. So the development process was highly iterative. That meant that we were constantly going back to people. Sorry, Kate, did you just have your hand up?
No, that was just the clapping react.
Oh, okay.
For
sorry.
not building things before understanding what people want.
Oh, right. So we had to keep going back to the stakeholders and iterating the navigator based on their feedback, and on a select group of people that we had internally as well, that we could go back to and say, what do you think of this idea? And this was only really possible, and this brings us to the last point on here, by keeping the design simple. And as a developer, I am someone, well, developers in general are well known for wanting to show their skills off and making things way too complicated. And there is, in fact, a whole principle that people should, or that developers are meant to follow. It's called this KISS principle, which stands for keep it simple, stupid. Like, don't overbuild your applications, because that makes them a lot more rigid and a lot harder to change, a lot more costly to throw away if you've gone really wrong. You can go back to the drawing board without having invested months before you went and got your first feedback, and then you find you cannot bend what you already have to match what you now perceive to be the need that you've received from the users. So maintaining a simple design became quite key to this project to allow us to be that flexible and to be able to react to the user's feedback. So yeah, moving on to the front end. Sorry, I have my notes on a separate screen. There we go. So as I said, we do not have the best reputation at USGS for building modern functional websites. We are catching up. We're moving a lot of our web pages into a content management system. But when you have this kind of these web apps that we're building that cannot contain, we're still prone to stuffing an awful lot of stuff into something that it ends up being crammed and firmly rooted in the 90s and look dated. So we wanted to ensure that the navigator had a much more modern look, much more approachable look. So that meant, as you can see in the screenshot on the right there, which is our landing page, we have an awful lot of white space. Websites now, if you notice, a lot of modern websites, they're not full of stuff. There's an awful lot of space around them, because quite frankly, people's concentration is, if I can't do what I want to do within a few seconds, I'm going to go away, which means you can't cram it with text. You can't cram it with loads of images. You don't want people to have to scroll a lot. It needs to be functional, quickly, understandable easily, and intuitive to use. So that is what we aimed for with the front end, to make it more approachable and easy to use for our time or tech poor stakeholders. And we did learn that a lot of them are very much time constrained. They don't have time to learn something more complicated. And the side effect of this as well, which is great, is that there are less places for bugs to hide, less places for bugs to even appear, because you've got less code. And again, much easier to modify with CSS and web development. When you change one thing, the rest of it can fall apart pretty easily. So it's very helpful to just not have too many elements on the screen at the same time. So a nice, simple white space design, very little text, and very intuitive. So next slide. But the backend was not immune to this pursuit of simplicity. So while end users are generally spared from having to get into the weeds of the technology that's powering a web app, the designers and maintainers most certainly are not. So as with the front end, avoiding complexity provides a system that's much more open to change and modification as we iterate this design from the user feedback. And like I said, it makes it much cheaper as well to build and maintain and run over time. When someone, if you look at this top graphic that we have on the screen here with the cross next to it, so when someone uses a web app normally, such as the navigator, they would generally communicate with servers constantly during that use. So if a user selected, in the case of the Coastal Science Navigator, a set of filters, that their browser would then communicate with a web server, which would then query a database and then send all that information back to the user's machine. And that results in an awful lot of hardware, an awful lot of software on our end that needs to be maintained or even just built in the first place. And again, if we need to change what we're trying to do, it's an awful lot of code to have to change to do that. You have to manipulate database tables and then all the code on the web server that does that querying for you. For large scale applications, this is indeed the correct approach. And it's very easy to default to that design, even when it's not warranted. But for the Navigator, we understood that the list of products that we were going to present were not that, it wasn't going to be a huge database. And that looking to the foreseeable future, it wasn't going to grow massively. And this allowed us to go for a much more simplistic approach. We decided to use, instead of a database in the back end, a flat file. So all of the information is just as JSON. I don't know if anyone knows what JSON is. It's a way of encoding information that a computer can read. And sending that, when the user requests the page, they basically get all the data at once, and then all filtering and sorting and any kind of interactive component to the Navigator is done in their browser. There's no communication necessary. And as a result, we remove the need even to have a database or any of these APIs, any kind of server-side code to deal with this. All we need is a simple web server to serve up their request when they load the page. And at that point, our job is done.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
So you're talking about, as you said, that you're not expecting the types of files to grow that much. So you were able to identify a set of data products that could essentially all be flat files that aren't being regularly updated, and that you could move to being hosted on an Amazon bucket rather than, say, having to pull out of NCEI every time. It kind of sounds like you were able to create a contained data environment just to support this, rather than actually reaching back into the various other USGS data networks.
Yeah, we had no intention to try and integrate with existing USGS databases of products, simply because, and this is part of the reason why we abandoned our initial idea of one tool to fit them all, is we have not been particularly good in the data management side of making all of these databases interoperable. So if we were going to build something that was going to go back and query all these things, it was going to result in an awful lot of shims having to be built between our app and these databases that we could use to convert our requests to their requests and back again, to make it that degree of interactive and that to have that scope to access all of our different product databases. So what we did, and there was, I'll let Erika speak to this maybe in a little bit, but we curated a set of products that promoted we were going for this. Let me try and articulate this. The Coastal Science program within USGS was our specific target for products for the Navigator. So we weren't trying to cover all of the USGS's products. It was a very specific subset of them. And so a team of us went out and initially curated a set of these products that we really wanted to get out there, that we felt would be especially useful to these stakeholders. And so we then deliberately built our own flat file table database of those products. So we went to the product owners and we asked them, hey, if you don't have it already, can you give us a description of your product that we can use to promote this? Jonathan, yeah, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think I'm familiar with the application, and so I think part of Kate's question is just maybe when she sees the demo, she'll become familiar. But I think there is something there that I know when I was looking for USGS data from the Coastal Hazards Program. I found the data set was in the publication warehouse, or it was in some other data repository, and I'm not sure how I would have found it through the navigator. So it's not comprehensive in a way, and I wonder if you thought about how to bring in those one-off data sets.
Right. So the issue we faced, I mean, I don't know what you were specifically looking for at the time, but in specific data sets themselves, we have hundreds of thousands of them. And again, to bring all of those data releases and that kind of stuff into the navigator would have been very difficult, and we would have been reinventing the wheel because that was already out there, as you already used a tool to find that. And we didn't want to do another tool that did the same thing, even if we might be able to simplify the process a little bit. So we actually deliberately excluded data releases from being within the navigator simply because of their scope, and because we were going to struggle to automate integration of all of those data releases into the navigator, and we didn't have the staff to manually go and try and create entries for them ourselves. I don't know what it was specifically you were looking for, but for the navigator, we went out and curated a list of products which we knew would grow, but we knew would not grow massively, that focused on the Coastal Hazards project. Do you want to expand on that at all, Erika?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Jonathan. And there, as Richard's touched on, there were some infrastructure issues. There were potential redundancy issues with, other ways that our data products are typically served. And so we actually established a pretty specific set of criteria for what sort of products we wanted to feature in the navigator, which we felt like would help to guide people to the actual data should they want it, but introduce kind of the topic or the theme or the umbrella under which that data sat, that might be, a different sort of entry point for them. So, they might not know what data that they were looking for, but they might know that they're looking for coastal flooding data. And so if the navigator could kind of cover, what information we have in the coastal flooding arena thematically in terms of other products, that pointing them to those locations would get them to the data as well. So again, it was this kind of back and forth with who are we trying to serve, and a new way of making information discoverable in ways that it's not typically. So
yeah, I think once we get to the demo, that'll make it easier, but that's helpful background for me.
Sure. I think we could actually click on Richard, right? We only have a couple more slides for this, and I'm looking at the time, and we can switch over to the demo.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up quickly saying,
Sure.
as you said in the bottom slide, because we could eliminate all of that complexity in the back end, and because we were basically serving what is considered a static site, that the interactive component is purely done with JavaScript in the user's browser. We're able to use Amazon S3. I think Kate might know a little bit about that from what I picked up on. But that is basically web accessible storage. So you can throw some HTML, JS files on there, and you basically got a web server that is entirely managed by someone else, can be securely locked down, has no real overhead for us, and considering the navigator's size, it basically costs us pennies every month. Very, very cheap. And that has a huge effect on longevity, because who's going to manage this? Who's going to pay for it? That kind of thing. Who's going to keep supporting the web server and the database and updating it every month? We don't have to worry about any of that right now. I'm not saying the navigator won't grow to a point where it may need a backend database in 3, 4, 5 years, but that's a tomorrow problem. And this is a way to get this out there as a new proof of concept for this kind of tool and see where it goes, and we can redevelop if we have to. That's the whole point of being iterative. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, go for it, Erika.
Okay. Was I going to cover this one, or were you?
You're all right. It doesn't really matter. I can do it if you seems
Either
you've got
way.
a sore throat. So yeah, we had an internal working group that helped us refine and test the different iterations of the Navigator. We also conducted interviews with external users, if we said. We did limit the number of that because usability literature suggests that if you have 5 users, you'll find 85% of your problems. And basically your return on investment as you go for additional testers diminishes rapidly. So 7 was just above that 5. It seemed like a good number, and it certainly was. It worked for us. We also did contextual inquiry interviews, which is basically where we observe users interacting with the product. So we get to see what they're clicking and, where we're maybe falling short on making it easy to understand for people to use and intuitive. And then we also took it to Coastal GeoTools, which is a conference focused on geospatial data and tools, technology, and information for coastal resource management professionals. We had a booth there with 2 computers set up and staffed, and basically allowed people to walk up and use it, and we would see how they were doing it and basically discuss it with them. And it was similar kind of contextual inquiry process, but kind of on the fly. So we got to do that for a couple of hours in the tool showcase, and I think we had about 15 people come, and that helped us refine things further and get some more external ideas, and have some informal kind of chats about it with people. So that was very beneficial for us as part of usability testing. I will let you go back now, Erika.
So what isn't complete without lessons learned? So I think we've made the point, identifying the audience early was really key to this. It did require a team, of not just research scientists that thought they could answer the question. It required expertise that spanned different career levels, as well as different disciplines. And Richard's a prime example of how key it was to bring him in early to the process, and how much our process benefited from him being involved and engaged early on. But this required us to do some 101 rudimentary, like, are we speaking the same language sort of thing. That took a lot of time. And, we also had to create a structure where the playing field was a little bit more level, where it wasn't a tiered structure where certain people were telling others what to do just because of seniority or otherwise. And so we invested in some work there. And human-centered design was key to helping us to structure our internal process. We also coined the term, or not coined the term, but again, our social scientist introduced us to the term ambiguity tolerance, which became key. It really resonated with the group because, I think a lot of people started to feel like this uncomfortable feeling that we're doing something, but I don't know what it is. Being able to name that for those that were participating was really, really helpful. They felt comfortable then feeling uncomfortable. If that makes sense. And that we were lucky to have champions within our program that were willing to support this, as well as support the amount of time that went into it. And we've also been learning about the challenges of collecting information and data on the use and analytics that come from producing one of these and releasing it into the wild. It's hard there. We don't have great capacity to do this at USGS, or mechanisms to do this. And that is kind of an ongoing challenge. So these are just a few. There's the URL for the Navigator, which I'll show you in a second. There's a link to the report on the listening sessions, other things. So I'm being mindful of time, so I'm gonna go to the demo right now.
I was trying to read that report because we're trying to do usability testing in our program, and it reads just like an academic paper. I feel like you definitely had a social scientist on board to talk about and like dissect the processes.
We did. And I do have another report that I want to share with you too. It's called So you want to build a decision support tool. She also wrote this. It's really good.
Yeah, I would appreciate something a little less highbrow, because
yeah,
it is that itself is difficult to access, the academic
absolutely.
language. Thanks.
Sure. Okay, so I'll put that in a second. Kate, here's your demo. It's not often I get to talk directly to a person, but this is what the navigator looks like. You've seen a few screen grabs right now. This is the home page. There's an about page, and it gives a little bit more about just kind of what it is. There's a video that demos it, a little bit more about why it was created, who was involved, and how to contact us. There's also a place for a feedback form, so you can email the team, or you can fill out a very bare bones feedback form here for us to collect more information. So let's go back to the home page and the guided search. So again, this was intended to help users to discover what they may or may not be aware of within USGS, particularly if they knew they were looking in a particular arena. So we'll get started. Again, lots of white space, really easy, quick instructions. If you don't know what you're looking for, just get started here. Here you can, this is kind of honing in on your geographic region. We'll check all 3 coasts for now, just to see what comes up. But we also gave users the option of skipping if they didn't have a specific answer to any of these questions. And you can see as we toggle between these, we're starting out with 67 available products initially, and that number is kind of getting winnowed as I tick the boxes. We'll go to next. I'm a coastal processes person, so I'm going to say that I'm really interested in learning more about coastal processes, but note I could skip this question if I wanted to. And I'm going to say, hey, let's look at identifying vulnerabilities and adaptation. So 3 quick questions, and now I'm down to 18 of the 67 products that match the filtered criteria. I can sort these in a number of ways. I can use the best match, or I can sort them alphabetically. This filters piece shows me the selections I just made. And if I'm to click on a specific product, I can either access the product directly. I get a little bit more information about what it is, the features that are involved, some of, again, those filters or properties, and some contacts that I can go to. This opens in a separate tab, so I can still go back to my search results and find those and figure out where the heck I was, so I don't lose my place there. I can also opt to change my filters, so I can add additional filters if I wanted to. So say I wanted just model outcomes, for example. Now I'm down to 7 products that are more relevant to that. If I go back to the home page, and I can, then just click through the filtered search and select accordingly. Yeah.
No, I was just, yeah. So you're relying on the USGS product managers / website managers for each of these products to make sure that your tool has the information it needs to connect to search. So you're avoiding hosting data, and you're really just kind of getting the appropriate documentation about these web products. That makes sense.
Yes.
And yeah, look, you have a lot of tools.
We do. We have a lot of things. I found out so many things that we do that I didn't know we did through this process. I mean, it's been incredible. Yeah, so again, just clicking on a few things, and this best match piece is something that Richard has just, it was implemented in the last update, Richard, right? In the last 6 months. So
Yeah.
we've got that. And we've also, because we're doing updates, we try to do them every 6 months. We've got a new date added functionality too. So you can just try and see what the most recent stuff is. Richard, is there any functionality out of the beautiful Navigator that you built that I haven't done justice to? that you want me to show or highlight?
Not necessarily. I mean, we had a lot back and forth about how these filters are actually going to work, like additive or, like and or when you select these things. And basically we kind of followed what we would, the principle of least surprise, as they call it, which to make it work basically like Amazon. If you went and you were looking at computers in Amazon, which is what I'm going to default to because I'm a tech nerd. If you went and you wanted a new computer, you would have on the left categories of filters you could select from, like what processor, how much RAM, how much storage. And if you selected two different processors, they would be additive. You would get all of those machines, for example. But then if you said 16 megabytes of RAM, you wouldn't get everything plus. It's hard to explain, but basically we had the filters operate as people would expect they would operate from other main websites that people are used to, such as Amazon, that kind of thing. And the best match option, which we added, basically put the ones that match the most number of tick boxes that you had selected at the top. So if something was both, if you just want to scroll up to the top of the filters, Erika, if something is both East Coast and West Coast, that would go up higher than the list than one that was just East Coast or just West Coast. Does that make sense? So that's kind of how the best match works, to kind of bring the more relevant results to the top, to bubble them up for the users.
Yeah, and I can see how the filters are kind of stacked to follow what I assume is kind of an understood workflow of the thought processes of your target users, right? Like if I'm a manager in Charleston, South Carolina, I'm going to be like, okay, yeah, geography is what I think about first because I need my backyard. The way these topics are framed are like, I'm probably in the Department of Planning and Land Use, or I'm in the, so the terminology and the stacking of the filters, the order you encounter them seems to me like it probably reflects a mental process from the people that you surveyed.
Which was largely driven by the other guided search, where we wanted to take people down through that. What are we thinking about first?
Yeah.
In those first 3 questions. So that's kind of how the filters then in this filter search, which doesn't go through that process, they reflect that same ordering as you've picked up.
Yeah, I think it's so great that you took the time to do that additional piece, because I put some resources in, including the design guide that we did for NOAA fisheries, and any of those, Jonathan, might be helpful for you in plain language, USDS and 18F guides for UX and user research. But yeah, just all the time that like people are like, well, we'll just set up the search filters to be like this. And then you talk to your users and they're like, that's not a word I would ever use, or I don't actually know what a coastal hazard theme is, right? So there's all of those folks who are close to the data who are like, this is how we organize things. And now we're going to.
And we also,
so really nice to see that.
We added the little informational boxes as well next to the filters, so people could click that and to see what we were defining that as, to make sure it aligned with what they were expecting it to be. We didn't do that for all of them, but we certainly did it for a lot of them. And so plans for the next iteration, we are going to add search. It's going to be a basic textual search. So the person basically has to enter the exact keyword. I mean, we're going to, get rid of capitalization and that kind of stuff. So it's case insensitive, but we're not going to try and get too much in the weeds of trying to anticipate what the user's typing. If they type it a little bit wrong, it's going to be, a direct comparison. So we're going to try and implement that, and that will search titles in particular, but also the short description that you see in the little cards that were on the right side of the screen. And then the longer descriptions that are in the actual product page. So it's going to search all of that. So that's going to be kind of cool. And we've actually also decided I don't know if you noticed, we did paginate the results originally. We feel that actually hinders usability.
Yeah.
Sometimes people want to see the whole list. And if they've used their filters, it shouldn't be unbearably long. So we're actually going to get rid of pagination for both mobile and desktop views, and this is mobile friendly as well. If Erika were to shrink the screen down, you'd see things start to jump around and rearrange, so it is mobile friendly. The only issue with removing pagination from mobile is if your filter list is at the top and you've got 30 products someone's just scrolled down through, if they want to change a filter, So we need to implement a quick jump button to get them back up to the filters. So that's the only thing that we have to add for mobile that we won't add to desktop. So that's the other change that we'll be putting in with this iteration.
So I apologize. I have to jump to run to another call, but I really appreciate you both taking the time, especially with the bronchitis and the technology challenges. I got a masterclass in your work, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you.
Thanks, Kate. It was really nice to meet you and hear just a little bit about what you did. So thank you,
Yeah.
and thanks for the links. So
Cool.
Very
Nice to see you, Kate. Bye-bye. Okay, so Megan's leaving. You guys, I know, Richard, you've been very kind to come out and during the storm, so I don't want to take too much more of your time. And I feel like, Erika, we can correspond. We can correspond offline with any other questions I might have. I just really want to thank you for doing this. We have a recording, apparently. I'm gonna send you the link for that. And hopefully I'll learn, be able to use some of the information. As I mentioned before, I've already kind of emulated the filter that you guys developed because I thought that was a really cool solution. We found like a quick app that we could implement without any development. It was just like a widget we plugged into the website, and it did pretty much the same thing you guys are doing with filters. So it was just kind of like a win-win. We got some, benefit from someone else built the quick app, so we did it at little to no cost, but we got the functionality that we wanted. But by no means are we done on improving it. So the next step for us is we're going to try some user testing. We kind of did it backwards, but we had to get something out onto the website, and there was no time to do all the thoughtful work that you guys did at the beginning. So we're playing catch up now. But yeah, I really appreciate it. And if I can plug one thing, but before you leave, the way I see this application fitting in to what the Discovery Cluster is doing, you guys are providing discovery of applications of, basically data or products that serve data, but you're not providing discovery to the data themselves. And this is actually a core theme for the Discovery Cluster that we started on in 2021, maybe it was 2020, called usage-based discovery. So the thing that the problem we were trying to tackle at that point is, can we make the data discoverable through the applications? So if we understood, if users more intuitively would relate to an application like sea level rise, and then if you can link to all the data sets that support that application, that's a much easier pathway for your average user than just having a full rich catalog of data, because at that level you need to understand the science fairly intimately. So I think that's something I'd like to talk to you further about, is this usage-based discovery paradigm, and maybe something you'd be interested in pursuing, or just trying to take notes off of how you've done this and define the scope of your search tool so well, so it serves the audience and intended purpose.
great.
We were very lucky to have the option to do that. Like this whole ability to embark upon this without really even knowing what we were going to do. You rarely get that opportunity. Very rarely. You definitely don't get it in the commercial world, and in the government world, it's hard to justify as well. But I think it really did pay off, and I very much hope that the bean counters encourage more of this and allow these projects to go ahead when there is a lot of ambiguity, but it really does pay off when you get to the end of it.
So are you now on that website? You wanted your Coastal Science button. Are you now competing with Earthquakes?
That's a good question. I need to check. I think we've made it up, but made it up there. But actually go see if that, I feel like that page has gone through some iterations, but I'll go check. That would be a good concluding slide. So,
Yeah, and also I think the tool is really useful right now that we're going through a transition in administrations. It's a good way for your managers to say, hey, this is what our program does. So
exactly.
it's maybe that's not what it was designed for, but it's a
No,
good.
it kind of was though. I mean, that was kind of, you know, what it wasn't necessarily designed for the congressional staffer, but it was, where can I find a lot of stuff all at once that's gonna, you know, something that pulls people in and exposes them to, you know, this application side, which I think is, you know, what you're hitting on, Jonathan, which is a really important point. So I did put a
So
link
yeah,
to the report I was mentioning in the chat too.
Right.
So
Cool. Yeah, the other idea I have for Discovery Cluster, the future is how we bring AI into the equation.
yeah.
And this is an opportunity. I mean, this whole paradigm came in after we started looking at usage-based discovery. And the whole idea that we could create simple websites like this, targeted to specific users, like have someone fill out a form and say, hey, I'm this persona. You do a matching and generate a simple application like you have specific to their needs. So we have an opportunity with AI, I think, to present structured website data to them in a much more customized and rapid response fashion, especially for coastal hazards. If you know that in the event of an emergency, you need to develop these websites quickly. And so I think there's a really real opportunity there with the advent of AI and you know, automatic content generation that maybe we should learn more about.
It's a Wild West.
Okay, well, anyways, those are my thoughts for the future, but I really appreciate your time, and I'll let you guys get back to it. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jonathan.
Yes, thank you. It's nice to meet you.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Richard.
Mhm.
Good to see you.